皆さん、こんにちは。ファッションレボリューションジャパンプロデューサーのマルティン・メンド・ユカです。今日はゲストに Good on You 共同設立者のゴードン・レヌーフさんをお迎えしています。Good on You が目指すのは、ある製品が与える本当の影響が値段と同じくらい簡単に誰にでもわかるような世界です。Good on You では、世界中の数千のブランドのサステナビリティへの取り組みを評価をし、消費者の選択をサポートしています。本トークでは消費者の権利、そしてどうすればより良い買い物をしていくことができるのか、Good on You の視点を通してお話ししていただきます。それではゴードンさん、よろしくお願いします。
皆さん、こんにちは。It's really great to be here. I'm very pleased to be invited by Fashion Revolution to talk to you today about sustainable consumption and in particular the fashion industry. So what I'm going to talk about today is three things. First, I want to talk about why everybody's consumer choices matter and what that means for our rights as consumers. And then I'll talk about how Good on You works and how it's designed to help you make choices that line up with your values. And lastly, I'll talk about a little bit about brands and retailers and what they should do to make it easy for you as a consumer to make choices that line up with your values and that are good for people, the planet, and animals. Consumer choices are key drivers of unsustainable consumption. Every time we choose to buy or rent a specific product, we send a message to companies that this is the kind of product that we want to buy and perhaps they should make more of. So those messages are really important in guiding what is ultimately produced. And it's quite clear that a very large share of the total production of our economies is determined by consumer demand, either directly to companies or indirectly to the companies that those companies buy from. Fashion is a major contributor to environmental harm. Depending on the country, clothing accounts for up to 5% of household spending. And estimates of total greenhouse gas emissions from the fashion industry range from 2 to 8% and sometimes even as high as 10% of total worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. And just one other indicator, fiber production is growing way faster than population. Most of the increase in materials comes from polyester and other materials derived from fossil fuels. These increases are responsible for pushing the level of greenhouse gas emissions in the wrong direction, and they contribute to increasing concerns about waste and resource depletion, as well as microplastic pollution. But there are many other impacts of fashion. Of course, there's lots of waste and overuse of resources. Deforestation and its impact on biodiversity is a major concern. All kinds of pollution on land, water, and air from things like dyes, pesticides, and microfibers. And then if we look at labour rights, there's unsafe working conditions, there's poor wages, and indeed, there's also harm to animals. So consumer action is essential to the green transition that we need to embark on. And so what that means is that the ability of consumers to take action based on good information is fundamental. Consumer agency is essential. And this is widely recognized. The Sustainable Development Goal 12, adopted by the governments of the world some decades ago, requires the global community to develop sustainable systems of production and consumption. And consumers have a key role to play in that. This was recognized by the OECD, the Organization of Developed Countries, 14 years ago, where they said that consumers are key to sustainable production. And just last year, Consumers International, the peak body for independent consumer organizations throughout the world, noted that driving sustainable choices depends on empowering and protecting consumers. So it's important to think of consumers not as being hectored or bothered into making sustainable choices, not as feeling guilty for doing the wrong thing. It's important to think of consumers as having a right to make responsible choices, a right to make choices that are aligned with their values. We should not criticize consumers who do not make sustainable choices, even where they say they explicitly want to. Instead, we need to investigate what are the challenges that are getting in their way, what's stopping them finding out what is the best choice and acting on it, taking into account the trade-offs that they need to make in their life to meet their needs, as well as meet their aspiration to be more sustainable. Consumers need the sustainable choice to be the easiest choice to make. So a fundamental understanding of consumers' roles in creating a better world is to understand that it's not our obligation to do better. It's not about feeling guilty. It's about having a right to make choices that most consumers already want to make. So we have a right to consume responsibly. And so this means that producers have obligations to play their part to live up to consumers' rights. Essentially, consumers need to be transparent about how goods and services are produced. They need to make available to consumers all the information they need to make a judgment about which brand or which product is more sustainable. So consumer choices create impacts on the environment, as we've seen, but they can also drive solutions. And this has been recognised by the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, when they said last year, demand-side measures can reduce end-use greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 70%. And by demand side, they mean socio-cultural change and consumer behaviour change. And so it's about supporting that consumer behaviour change that we're going to get the solutions we need. So the good news is that a majority of consumers say that they want to act more sustainably. But sometimes it's easy to say, of course, I want to have a better world. Of course, I want to buy the more sustainable product. But is that what consumers really want? Well, there's some interesting research that looks not just at what they say or what we say as consumers, but what we actually do and what our underlying values say about who we are. And that research tends to suggest that about 50% of consumers feel bad, feel conflicted, in the words of the research, when they don't make sustainable choices. So even though 70, 80, 90% of people will say they want to pay more for a more sustainable good or that they actively search for sustainable products, we think that about 50% of consumers do that in a way where if they fail to find what they're looking for that's more sustainable, they feel a bit of guilt, or they feel bad or feel conflicted when they don't find the product that matches both their practical needs and their desire to be more sustainable. Again, we come back to this question of what's stopping consumers act on their desire to consume more sustainably. And there's a number of issues, but two important ones are a lack of information about which brands are better, which takes us back to the right to consume sustainably and the obligation for producers to give us all the information that we need to make those decisions. And the second one then is a lack of the sustainable products being on the market. But of course, if we can empower consumers to reward the brands that are being transparent, that are making more sustainable products, then that drives more brands to join those who want to make sustainable products available for consumers. And we've certainly seen some progress in that area over the last 10 to 15 years. So in summary, we can often feel that our actions as an individual don't make any difference. We can say, I'm just one person amongst 9 billion people on the planet who are taking action. But actually, it's the sum of all of our choices that determine the future. And importantly, millions and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people do care and will act, provided that it's easy to do. So that's really encouraging. And it suggests that if we do have access to this information, we can, as consumers, collectively make change.
Thank you. I want to ask you a couple of things that came up my mind, but probably to the other listeners. So firstly, about consumer empowerment, because you use this word a couple of times, but for me or for normal people, we just buy clothes, maybe, buy magazines and, I want this kind of color, brand, shape, and we go to shops, online shopping, and we buy. So we don't feel like we have a power, So when somebody say consumer empowerment or like you have a power, that sounds a bit, doesn't really register.
Yeah.
So well, I think and also for Fashion Revolution, what we are trying to encourage, we are actually trying to empower people. Ask the brand who made my clothes. So that's one of the empowerments that we are trying to do, but we always kind of struggle to, to tell people that you actually can do it. So how do you do it? How do you empower normal people like me?
Well, I think the first thing is that when we make a decision to buy something, we're influenced by a lot of different things and we take a lot of different things into account. And so nobody's saying that people should only buy a product that is fully sustainable, whatever that means. Not sustainable to buy a sustainable product if you don't need it. So the first question is reflecting on what you need. And certainly there are things that consumers can do to ask themselves, do I really need this thing? Some people say the 30 wears test, will I wear it 30 times? Things like that. And we have some suggestions on our website about that sort of framework consumers can use. But ultimately, when you do decide that you need to buy something, then you will be making trade-offs. You'll be thinking about the quality of the product. You'll be thinking about the style of the product. You'll be thinking about what your friends think about the product. You'll be thinking about the price. And probably, ideally, for more than 50% of consumers, you want to know how the product and the brand behind it impacts on what you care about. And it's not like you only think about one of those things. You think about all of those things. And it's easier to get information about some of those things than others. It's much easier to get information about the price and what it looks like. It's harder to get information about how long it will last. And it's really hard to get information about how it was made and how that impacted on people, planet, and animals. And so Good On You's role is to try and give you information about that thing so you can take it into account when you make a shopping choice. And so when you make a choice, you may choose the best brand that doesn't look very good, or you may choose the worst brand that looks fantastic, or you may choose a brand that's not the best and not the worst, but looks good enough for you. So, you make these trade-offs and of course throw in price and convenience and peer pressure and whatever into that equation. It's a complicated mix, but the empowerment comes from being able to factor in the sustainability issue in your trade-offs when you price something.
So yeah, you're putting like those information that are usually very hard to reach onto the plate, so that we can have more factors to think about, like a price, style, of course, but sustainability, and then peer pressure and things like that. So the more options that we have, probably we can make better choices.
Yeah. And it depends a lot on the individual, because, some people say to us, I would never buy, I aim to buy products that have a rating of 4 or 5. And other people say, I'm happy so long as the rating's at least 3, So people have different tolerances, if you like, different priorities, and that's absolutely fine. But if we can just get people to find alternatives to the brands that rate lowest, then that ultimately reduces their sales. If we can have hundreds of millions of people avoiding those brands, then they either have to choose to be smaller or improve their practices.
Right. So maybe I was thinking the word empowerment too big. So it's just like making your choice, your comfortable choice. That is already an empowerment, you think?
Yeah, but I think if we can have tens or hundreds of millions of consumers making choices that are influenced by easy to access sustainability information, then that starts to have an impact on brands. We know over the last 3 or 4 years that there's been an increase in greenwashing about sustainability. And the reason for that is the brands know that this influences consumers. And so if it's discovered about a brand that they are not sustainable at all, then a big percentage of consumers will want to avoid that brand if they can.
Okay, so consumers can make better choices and try to influence the companies, the brands and retailers. But at the same time, retailers should change. I think it should go, they should go hand in hand at the same time. But we always have discussion, okay, who's first? Who's going to take a risk first? Who's going to compromise first? So what's your take on that?
So by retailers, are you talking about e-commerce platforms, or are you talking about the brands as retailers?
Brands, companies.
Yeah. The way I see it is that there's a role for government in banning the worst practices. So, we want to set standards and say that we cannot use these chemicals in fashion production. We want to say that brands have a minimum level of responsibility to ensure there's no modern slavery in their supply chains. And we can bring those standards up and up to a certain level, but it's a political process, and we'll never have the government able to dictate everything about how we produce clothes. And there will always be better, more sustainable and less sustainable brands, even above those minimum level. Government and brands and people like us to inform consumers and empower them to choose better brands and encourage, and thereby encourage brands to make more sustainably and to make a more diverse array of products available, made in a sustainable way.
And so we all work together and influencing each other, and that's how we go. So Gordon, Tell me, how is Good on You addressing these customer concerns?
So Good on You is the #1 sustainability ratings platform starting with fashion. And what that means is that Good on You is trying to make it as easy as possible for consumers to know how a product impacts on the things that they care about. Our vision is a world where everyone, everywhere can know the impact of a product or a brand as easily as they know the price and other features of the product that they're interested in. More than that, we should be able to find lower impact alternatives to a product we're looking at just as easily as getting that initial information. So as we discussed, the problem is that at least 50% of consumers want to shop more sustainably and feel conflicted if they're not able to do so. But it's too hard to know how brands impact on the issues we care about and to make better buying decisions. So our solution is built upon the world's most comprehensive and credible brand ratings system. We look at nearly 1,000 different data points for large brands on 100 different issues, and we weight those issues by the consensus expert view on what's the most important. And we bring that all together into a simple, easy to use score on a 5-point scale. Until now, our focus has been on assessing brands operating or selling to the markets in North America and Europe, and of course, Australia, where we were born. But we do hope to move to other countries, including Japan, in the near future, possibly as soon as this year in the case of Japan. So overall, Good on You is designed to make sustainable shopping easy. We create brand ratings that, as I said before, come down to a simple label like great or good or it's a start or not good enough or we avoid it, the 5 smiley faces to support those ratings. And we supplement those overall scores with detailed information for consumers who want to find out more about why our rating is at a particular level for a particular brand. And then those ratings are listed on the Good on You app, a mobile phone app where you can search up to 5,000 brands and see what their ratings are. And we'll be trying to grow that to 10,000 brands in the next year or so. And you can also access on our website. At the moment, of course, it's still in English, but as I said before, we're looking towards a Japanese version sometime over the next 6 to 12 months. So Good on You creates change by supporting consumers to buy better. And then brands have an incentive to do better because they know that they'll reach more consumers if they do. And when I say do better, I mean have better conditions for their workers, have better environmental impacts, and to look after animal welfare at a higher level. And then when brands are doing better, that leads to the positive social impacts. As I said before, the fashion industry is responsible for a good chunk of greenhouse gas emissions. And if we can get fashion brands to reduce that by 30, 40, 50%, then that's a significant contribution to us meeting our Paris targets. That is not an easy goal to achieve, but consumers have a part in pressuring industry to make those changes.
Thank you, Gordon, to let us know how Good on You works. But I am curious how you rate the brands.
Yeah, well, so first of all, how we rate the brands. It's important to know that we believe brands should be publishing all the information about their sustainability performance so that consumers and other stakeholders like environmental groups and unions and government can know how they're performing. And so we expect brands to publish the details of what they're doing, and we assess brands based on public information. There's also an interesting new law that's been passed in Europe, which is going to require large companies to report against a dozen important environmental and labour issues from 2025. So larger companies will have to go through some very specific disclosures about their impacts on things like climate change, biodiversity, resource use, pollution, labour conditions and wages and so on. And so that's another way that we'll be able to get access to information to share with consumers. So based on that public information, we check whether the brand has adopted the best practices that people agree on in relation to each of those important issues. And then we score the brand based on how well they're doing, how well they are achieving, how well they are, committing to and achieving the best practice that people think they should adopt for specific issues. So in terms of a team, we have a team of 5 ratings analysts with a lot of experience in places like the CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, PhD in materials, PhD in circular economy. So we've got people with higher levels of knowledge about the environmental and labour issues that are important in the fashion supply chain. But we also consult on our methodology with other organisations. So we work with an organisation called 4 Paws in relation to our animals methodology, and we do consult with other organisations in relation to the labour and environmental parts of the system we use to rate brands.
So you said published information. So even if they're doing it, but if the information is not on website or on their sustainability report, it doesn't count, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, we think it's really important that brands communicate with their customers. Not every customer has access to Good On You, and Good On You isn't the only external organisation that wants to know this information. So as far as we're concerned, if a brand isn't prepared to say what they're doing, then they should be discounted. And, you know, I note in that context, this new EU law, which is going to require brands to publish the kinds of information that we use to assess brands.
So how do you stay objective? Because that's very important to rating agencies like you, I guess.
Yeah, that's why we have such a detailed set of criteria. So whilst we have an overall score, that's based on scores for environment, labour and animals. And then in turn, the environment score is based on assessment of climate change, biodiversity, pollution, chemicals, waste, and good environmental citizenship. And then each of those has items underneath, and each of those has very specific questions and very specific answers. So each brand is scored right down to the detail of, you know, do you recycle offcuts? Do you have a take-back program? Have you set a greenhouse gas target? Have you reported on how you're going against your target? So there's a whole lot of very specific questions which are weighted and scored so that we can produce the ratings. It's not just, I mean, sometimes you see on websites that this brand has a badge for being vegan, or this brand has a badge for being organic, and that's really only a very small part of the story. And to my mind, you should be considering the brand's performance as a whole, or at least its environmental performance as a whole, and not just one issue like having some organic products.
So you are not only, you know, rating, you come from somewhere else to say you're good or you're doing great or you can do better. It's more like you also do kind of capacity building for the brands to do better, right? Can you tell us a bit about that too?
Yeah, we have a new program that we've developed with Farfetch where brands can log on to a tool where they can see exactly how they have been scored, and they get a lot of tips about how they can improve their performance and therefore their score, and they get referrals to other organizations that can help them do better, and then ultimately they can resubmit their data, provided it's backed up with public statements, and they can have their brand reassessed. So that is a platform that we hope will allow brands to understand the most important things they can do to get better, and then to act on that and then update their ranking.
That's great. So can we see the list of the specifications that you have? Like, because I think that will be a very valuable, like almost like a checklist for consumers to know to ask, and also
Yeah, on the Good On You website, there's a menu item called How We Rate, and that leads to a page and then a supporting PDF document, which does have some details on the topics that we look at. We are going to be updating that with some more detail in the next 3 to 6 months, so look out. But it's already described in some detail our overall approach and the key issues that we look at in each of the areas of environment, labour rights and animals.
That's great, because at Fashion Revolution as well, we do a fashion transparency index. We publish a report, it's like very thick, 250 pages report every year to rate how transparent the fashion retailers are. But the goal of our fashion transparency index is not just to rate and say these people are good, these people are not good. It's more to give people a checklist of, okay, what are the best practices? What are the points that matter now?
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, we've had a guide for small brands for some time, which we provided to them when needed. But now with this new tool, you can go into every single point, every single issue that we've looked at, and every single possible response that you might have had. And so that really does give you a lot of as a brand, gives you a lot of ideas about how you can get better. And, we work with some retailers who promote this to their brands because so a retailer that stocks 100 brands or 3,000 brands, depending on their size, many of them are very keen that they stock more sustainable retailers, and they're often willing to help their current list of brands to get better. And so this tool, which is called Good Measures, is available to retailers to help them work with their brands to improve.
I just want to add that Good On You app, you can download it as if you just listen to how it works, and if you want to experience it. I have it here. So it's a really great resource. If you want to buy something, it's almost like a directory.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that. There are a lot of international sustainable brands in there, and one or two Japanese ones, but there's probably a lot of Japanese more sustainable brands that are not yet listed on Good On You, and I'm really hoping that during this year we can fix that problem, and they will be listed, and hopefully that the information about them can be available in Japanese before the end of the year too.
Yeah, now we've talked about what consumers can do and how Good On You can help. So what should brands and retailers, what can they do?
Well, first they need to trace their whole supply chain. They need to know where the products that they sell come from and what steps they've been through. And then they can identify all their impacts on people, planet, and animals, and work out which ones are the most significant and start to address them. And then finally, they need to be transparent about their whole production processes. As Fashion Revolution says, who made my clothes, which is a shorthand way of saying, please tell us everything we need to know so we can make a good decision about which brands we should support and which we should avoid. But what should brands not do? Well, they should not greenwash. They shouldn't use vague terms like eco-friendly or carbon neutral without the evidence to back it up. And they shouldn't focus on minor issues, which are not the most significant ones in their supply chain. So often I'm suspicious when people only talk about how their packaging is great, but don't talk about their greenhouse gas emissions or their pollution or their impact on workers. Often brands will say, we're going to do this by such and such a date. We're going to be carbon neutral in 5 years' time. We're going to pay a living wage by 2030. That's so far away, and in the future, it should not be something you put too much weight on. It's good for brands to have a target, but it's much better to actually deliver on action now and talk about how they're actually making progress towards that target. And so without that progress, I wouldn't put too much weight on a target. And then we see brands who try and give the impression they're sustainable or ethical through their design, using green colors, pictures of trees and the ocean, but not actually providing very much detailed information about their impacts. And finally, one of the most insidious ways for brands to pretend that they're sustainable is to have a small proportion of their production being a conscious collection or ethical, but 95%, 99% of what they produce is in fact not sustainable. And the sustainable line gives them a kind of green halo, it's called, and gets people into the store or onto their online store, their EC store, and shopping often with the unsustainable products, even though they've been brought to the brand by the sustainable marketing. And what about retailers? Here we're thinking about multi-brand retailers, e-commerce platforms or department stores. And the first thing they can do is to set minimum standards for the brands they stock. They should not stock brands that do nothing at all to move in the direction of sustainable and ethical production that consumers are demanding. They can use Good On You data to identify which brands are doing best and to communicate that with their customers, as a number of global retailers do, including Farfetch in the UK. And they can encourage the brands that they stock to keep improving and even provide support and guidance to them to help them get better, especially the smaller brands. So that's a wrap for what brands and retailers can be doing, Yuka.
Thank you, Gordon. Now you've told us what retailers and brands can do and should not do, which is greenwashing. So if a brand started the journey to become more sustainable, and of course it's not perfect. There are some things that they started to take care of, but of course there are so many other aspects. And as a consumer, how do you think we can support them in a very effective way? Because it's very hard to adjust the tones. We don't want to be a scary people.
Yeah,
it doesn't really work. Persuade someone. So what do you think from your experience is most effective to to drive a change together.
I think, politely, nicely say to the brand that they really want to know how products are made and they expect the brand to be transparent, that they expect the brand to communicate about this, that they expect those communications to be concrete and specific about what they're doing now, and not vague language and not just about the future. And I suppose that they understand that is, we as consumers understand that the brand won't be perfect now, but it should be aiming to get better. So we want to hear about what they're doing, but also what they're not doing and how they're going to fix that over time. So I think that's one thing. I guess asking specific questions that are genuinely important to you. If it's important to you that workers are treated well, then sure, ask the brand to be transparent about their whole production process, but then tell them what's important to you and why, and how you'd like to support brands that are addressing those issues.
So be genuine and specific. Yeah, that's good. That's a good strategy. Okay. So finally, I wanted to ask you, what's your key message do you want to tell to your Japanese audience?
Well, I think the key message is that you're not alone, that there are millions of people who care about or who want to make consumer choices that are more sustainable, and every choice counts. And I think the second most important message is not to feel guilty that you can't be perfect, because nobody can be perfect. I think the thing is that when you can take an action to improve the quality or the sustainability of the products that you buy, whether that's fashion or anywhere else in your life, then do so. But don't feel that everything has to be sustainable, because that's setting you up to fail and you'll never do it and you'll feel discouraged and you'll kind of give up. So I like to say the perfect is the enemy of the good. That means that we should do what we can when we can, and try to get better every day, but not expect to be perfect for fear of failing and giving up.
Totally. Thank you so much, Gordon. It was very, very informative and so much insights. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very, very, I think it will be very helpful for Japanese consumers who are sometimes feel a bit lost in this sustainability, to try to be a bit more like responsible in purchasing, in shopping. ありがとうございました。
It's my pleasure. Arigato gozaimasu for you and also to your colleagues at Fashion Revolution. And thank you to everybody in the audience for being interested in this very important topic and sticking to the end. So I'm very appreciative of your support. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。
Arigato gozaimasu.